Hello and welcome to CommLab India's eLearning Champion Pod. I'm your host Tanushree, back again with yet another interesting episode on the what, why, when, and how of scenario-based learning. Joining me in this conversation is Shalini, Director Learning Solutions. Welcome to the podcast, Shalini.
Thank you, Tanushree, and a very warm welcome to all our viewers.
Right. In today's episode, we will be examining about what exactly is scenario-based learning and why is it so effective, followed by the types of scenarios and the various types of training they are used into. We'll also be
Right.
looking into the branching scenarios and when to use them. We'll also discuss when not to use scenarios and some best practices for successful scenario based training program. So let's dive into today's podcast. To kick off the discussion, I'd like to ask Shalini, what makes scenario based learning so popular?
Okay, let me answer that question by giving you a scenario. Imagine you're at home alone over the weekend, you're at your laptop, and suddenly you hear a noise behind you and you see this masked intruder. And she tells you, step away from your computer, and there'll be dire consequences if you shout for help. So, what do
Right.
you do? So, do you do whatever she says? She has a gun. Do you try to slip a help note under the door when she's not looking? You're home alone for the next 3 days. So, it's going to be a long uh, time. Or do you just desperately hope that, when your home mates come back at the end of those 3 days, they'll figure out something to do. They'll catch the subtle signs you're sending out for help. I mean, what would you do?
Well,
This is
I'm
a
good into martial
question
art.
for anyone. Sorry.
Right. No, I was telling that I'm good at martial arts, so maybe I'll try that.
Oh, okay, so your plan of action is very clear. But
Right.
so, but for the less talented ones among us, when it comes to martial arts, we would probably be wondering, okay, what would we do? So here's the thing. That's the power of scenarios. They have the ability to really transport you to a different world. I'm sure when I threw this question, immediately your mind was going to the possibilities and trying to analyze which is the best course of action. For you, of
Yes.
course, the answer was clearer. But that's the power of scenarios. They give you a very deeply immersive learning.
Right.
I mean, when it in scenarios when used in the L&D field, they
Mm.
create that immersive learning which engages you. And because you're more engaged, you tend to remember things better. And
Right.
because you remember things better, you're able to recall that when you need it most. And you're able to synthesize that information and apply it to your real life. So that is the power and the attraction of scenario-based training.
Right. So sounds interesting. And let's venture into more. And can you share some of the benefits of this approach, Shalini?
Yeah. See, the best thing about scenario-based training is that, it helps you to put the learner in a risk-free environment,
Right.
but where there is a real challenge, there is a real problem to be solved. It's as close to the learner's real life as possible. And the learner needs to work through some problem and is
Mm.
given feedback as he or she progresses. And
Right.
they, the biggest thing is that, they are forced to apply,
Mm.
synthesize information, recall information, apply their critical thinking skills, and then arrive at a decision. Because in every scenario which you present, invariably it's followed with
Mm.
some decision which the learner has
Yes.
to take or which the learner has to validate. If it's a scenario in some third person, then you throw the question to the learner. What do you think this person should do? So you have the
Mm.
thinking cap on as long as you are being presented with meaningful scenarios. I would like to qualify my statement. Not all scenario based training is impactful and effective
Mm.
unless if it is instructionally sound and meaningful. So
Right.
that in a nutshell is, why scenario based training allows you to do so much more than
Hmm.
just a regular e-learning. So when it comes to the benefits, as I mentioned earlier, it's a safe zone where you
Hmm.
can apply your thinking. There are consequences, but they're not dire as they would be in real life. You are allowed to see the outcomes of your choices,
Right.
and that really sticks because
Correct.
it's not enough just to be told you're right and wrong, but when you
Hmm.
see the consequences play out, especially
Right.
in longer branching scenarios, then it
Hmm.
drives home the learning very effectively.
Right.
And then, of course, the other benefits are, yeah, the application bit, the engagement part, you're immediately drawn into it because it's like a short story. And who
Right.
doesn't like stories, right?
Correct.
So
Hmm.
you're drawn in, you're engaged, you put yourself into the character's shoes, and you take your decisions. So that is the beauty and some of the benefits of scenario based training.
Yeah, that's interesting to know, Shalini, that scenarios can be used for engaging learners, and it actually helps learners to understand what real life challenges they might face, and just not right or wrong, whether the decisions are just right or wrong, but it is the proper justification is given to them that why that decision would impact their future course of action.
Right.
So, yes. I'm just curious to know, Shalini, that do scenarios vary depending on the content and or the desired learning outcomes? What are the various types of scenarios
Right.
that can be used?
Right. So, one simple way of looking at the different kinds of scenarios is, depending on the outcome, as you said,
Right.
uh, intended outcome.
Hmm.
One is the first one is the scenario where you explore what might happen.
Okay.
So it's like an exploratory kind of a scenario. So basically, the learner is presented with a few choices, and more than one could be right. And
Right.
of course, feedback is given for why each one of those could be right. So
Correct.
it's more about the likelihood of something
Hmm.
happening. Like,
Right.
what do you think will happen if we don't control climate change in the next 5 years?
Right.
Animals will lose their habitats,
Hmm.
the temperatures will rise up, the sea levels, ocean levels will rise up. So there are all kinds of possibilities. These may
Hmm.
happen, might.
Right.
Now, the other one is normative ones, where there is one specific outcome
Hmm.
you know, for that for that scenario, there's only one specific right thing to do, the right decision to make.
Right.
So, our typical courses, compliance training courses, where we put the
Hmm.
learner into a situation. Now, either you do it right or you don't do it right. There is no in between because you're either compliant or you're non-compliant.
Correct.
So that's a very specific kind of situation.
Right.
And then you have the predictive kind of scenarios where what will happen. There's more
Right.
degree of certainty as
Right.
compared to the what may happen. There's a likelihood of this happening. This is more with a more degree of certainty. This will
Hmm.
happen. So
Right.
again, I mean, it's just really more to do with how effective
Hmm.
are your scenarios and what is your goal
Hmm.
than trying to see probably, okay, is this predictive, is this exploratory, or is this normative? So it
Right.
just helps to have very basic understanding of them in place.
Hmm. Okay. So that was really nice to understand that depending on the situation and your learning outcomes, whatever you have decided, you can plan for your scenarios accordingly.
Right.
Right. So, Shalini, we all have heard about branching scenarios and simple one question scenarios. So, are there any guidelines on when to use what?
Right. So let me begin with the simple scenarios first.
Hmm.
Uh, these are used when you don't really want the learner to, explore
Hmm.
various paths.
Right.
You just present a simple scenario, present them with options, and it's enough for the learner to select possible correct responses, and it ends
Hmm.
there.
Correct.
Uh, it- Most of our compliance training really is
Hmm.
can be very effective even with simple scenarios,
Right.
right? You don't waste too much time. Like I remember this project we done recently where it was on customer experience, and it was imperative that the whole organization understands customer
Right.
experience.
Hmm.
So and there were certain uh, behaviors that the
Right.
learner was supposed to exhibit in different
Hmm.
situations.
Hmm.
So before teaching the content, we actually started each topic with
Hmm.
a very interactive, with a very engaging scenario. We used animations, we used Beyond Go actually to create these scenarios,
Hmm.
mini stories. But
Right.
there's only one decision point, one question for the learner to respond to.
Right.
So it could play out, you could
Hmm.
have the whole mini story playing out, but you have only one decision point, one correct choice where the learner
Hmm.
responds. So for many courses, this is sufficient.
Hmm.
Now, when it comes to the branching scenarios, that's when these are highly effective when you're teaching slightly more complex
Right.
behaviors,
Hmm.
slightly more complex topics where you allow a learner
Hmm.
to select, make a decision, and let them progress down that path up to maybe two or three or more levels of decisions. So
Right.
basically, you're allowing the learners to play out their choices.
Hmm.
You don't immediately tell the learner what are the repercussions of your wrong choice initially. You let
Correct.
them proceed down that path.
Right.
So this is really very effective in a lot of areas like sales training, soft skills,
Hmm.
leadership. Leadership is a great
Right.
example because again, you sometimes it's not that there are some wrong decisions, but there
Hmm.
are good, better, and best.
Right.
So the advantage with branching scenarios is you can really build them in such a way that the learner's response
Hmm.
determines the response of the other character in the story.
Right.
Who's responding to you based on your decisions, or who's responding to that character whose decisions
Hmm.
the learner is taking.
Hmm.
So that way, you actually get to know what are the final consequences of
Right.
the series of decisions that you've made. So that
Correct.
is a very because see that's how we do it in real life.
Right.
We we try something,
Hmm.
there is a response, we still proceed.
Hmm.
Then we are faced with another response which came about as a result of our previous decision, and
Correct.
then we go ahead and tackle that. So that's how
Hmm.
branching scenarios work, and
Right.
they are really effective.
Right. Yes, it was really interesting to understand that branching scenarios are they really mimic the real life situations wherein the person gets the opportunity to how in our real life we have unprecedented challenges.
Yes,
So this actually prepares the
absolutely,
learners to be
absolutely.
open to whatever comes to them, and like they will be more comfortable now to face the real life challenges as they come into their day to day work.
Right,
Right.
absolutely.
Yes. So, Shalini, can you now share something about how to get started with building a scenario based training?
Right. Um, Basically, it's the same process that you would follow for, the design, the planning, the design, the
Right.
development.
Hmm.
Except that, when you're building scenarios in the planning phase, you have to really take some decisions around.
Hmm.
Take a look at your learning objectives and then decide what kind of scenarios you want. For
Hmm.
instance, we don't recommend using branching scenarios for learning objectives that are lower than Bloom's level 3. So it,
Right.
it really doesn't warrant that kind of effort.
Correct.
But the higher up you go, then
Hmm.
it becomes more effective to use branching
Right.
scenarios.
Hmm.
Also decide, what kind of scenarios do you want? Are you going to use them in the first person? Are you going to use them in the third person?
Right.
For sensitive topics like
Hmm.
sexual harassment, for instance,
Yes. Hmm.
it's recommended that we use the third person.
Right.
And so that's your planning part. You also decide is, what kind of, what's your goal?
Hmm.
Do you just want one specific outcome from the learner, or are you
Right.
going to let them explore a few options and so on?
Hmm.
Then in the design part, that's when you actually go through the content and identify where are the various uh, possible decisions for a learner to
Right.
take.
Hmm.
And you collaborate with the SME to make sure that
Yes.
whatever scenarios you're developing are meaningful and relevant to their business context. And this
Right.
is where you have to work really closely with the SME, because generic scenarios don't work except if it's some generic training
Hmm.
on you know say data security, or even then they're going to
Right.
be very specific
Hmm.
instances which you can't develop. So it
Right.
makes sense to really work very closely with the SME.
Hmm.
And as a part of your design, when you identify all these decision points, especially if you're building a longer branching kind of a scenario,
Right.
map them visually. Put
Right.
just make a rough flow
Hmm.
and have this laid out visually, because this will not only help you later when you are doing the actual storyboarding, but it will also help you to keep coming back to see if there's anything you've missed, and at
Right.
what points do you need to loop the learner back to an original decision, and
Hmm.
so on. And finally, when it comes to the development, yes, thankfully, most popular authoring tools offer templates for
Right.
scenarios. Take advantage
Hmm.
of these templates, and of course, there will always be some degree of customization you would have to do, especially if you have
Right.
very long branching scenarios. But
Hmm.
still, there are very quick wins possible with most popular authoring tools. And
Right.
test your branching scenarios again and again, and make
Hmm.
sure that it's all in place, because I remember when we were working on a very long branching scenario,
Hmm.
you know, all everything worked well, except for one small link, and that
Oh.
kind of threw everything into a loop. So, we really,
Hmm.
it's very important that we spend that effort and the time to test
Hmm.
these scenarios.
Right. Okay, so that was very useful, Shalini, that we must be careful of aligning whatever scenarios we are building with the learning objectives, and then how we should take care of different types of contexts. And based on that, we should decide what kind of scenarios we are going to use for the training. And the last one, which is, I feel the most important thing, is to test it first.
Yeah.
So, definitely to avoid any glitches during the actual training session and to help learners having a smooth experience, learning experience, definitely testing is needed. So, that
So,
was a very useful tip. Thank you for sharing that. So, I want to understand, Shalini, that can scenarios be used in all types of training? Could you please share that where scenario based training is more effective?
right. Um, that's a good question, actually. So, I think sometimes we tend to, jump in very enthusiastically, and we want scenarios in all kind,
Right.
almost every kind of course. So this is where,
Hmm.
yeah, one needs to step back and see, does
Hmm.
this content really require scenarios?
Right.
So I would suggest that, for certain types of trainings, it is better to avoid
Okay.
scenarios, because it's not
Hmm.
really required. For instance, procedural or process training.
Right.
So there is no, uh, you want the learner to learn in a linear sequence,
Hmm.
and there is only one way of doing it.
Right.
There's just one right way. You follow the sequence, you follow the process, you follow the
Hmm.
procedure, and so in such instances, just a simple linear course would be
Hmm.
fine.
Right.
Um, then when it comes to new hire onboarding, for instance,
Hmm.
they're coming, new hires are coming to learn about your company, your vision, mission, culture, your departments, your values, and so on.
Hmm.
And you don't really want them to apply something that they already know because all this is new to them. So
Right.
here, again, scenario-based training would be an overkill.
Hmm.
So basically, any kind of foundational learning or any kind of learning to which the learners are very new, it doesn't
Right.
make sense to, throw them into scenarios and ask them to do something. So
Right.
foundational learning, it's better to proceed in a linear, sequential way,
Hmm.
progressively building upon what learners have learned. So this is where I would say we can avoid scenario-based training. Now, when it comes
Okay.
to where are they highly effective,
Yes.
I think there are a couple of areas: policies and legal training, compliance
Right.
training included.
Hmm.
See, this kind of content tends to be a little dry. And
Yes.
also, there's a feeling among learners and employees that, okay, I know this all. I've seen it once. I just know it. So
Exactly.
it would be interesting to put the learner into unexpected situations.
Hmm.
Challenge the assumptions that they already have, so that they really have to think about, okay, what is the right thing to do here?
Right.
So that is, we found that scenarios for compliance training and these kind of mandatory legal trainings are
Hmm.
really effective because they transform the content. You bring a mini storytelling approach, and that
Hmm.
really lets the learner engage with the content.
Hmm.
And the second one I would recommend is behavioral training,
Okay.
soft skills.
Yes.
Um, you know, you because there are so many nuances
Right.
involved in behavioral training.
Hmm.
Scenarios really help. I remember
Right.
this project that we had worked on,
Hmm.
where it was all about a cultural sensitivity towards
Okay.
a certain population in the context of health.
Hmm.
And there were very tricky situations that healthcare givers would encounter, which they were expected to handle,
Hmm.
keeping, ensuring that there is equality. There are no health
Hmm.
disparities when it comes to the way they deal with patients and so on. So there were
Right.
lots of nuances. So we
Hmm.
built that entire course from, just taking the learner from scenario to scenario.
Okay.
So that was highly effective. Now,
Hmm.
very nuanced, a lot of gray areas. So
Right.
this was very effective because it helped the learner to really figure out, okay, what's the best thing to do? What is an okay thing to do? What is definitely not the thing to do? So
Hmm.
behavioral training, again,
Hmm.
I would say it's pretty recommended. Any complicated
Hmm.
topic or subject which
Right.
requires challenging the learner's assumptions, which
Hmm.
requires making them apply their critical thinking skills, their problem
Right.
solving skills. So I would say
Hmm.
that for such trainings, scenario based training really works. And also, expensive kind of training, which
Hmm.
you can't replicate in real life.
Right.
First of all, you can't come up with all those likely situations. And even if you
Right.
can take the learner, then maybe it's an expensive proposition. So put
Hmm.
them into scenarios and let them figure out in those replications of the real world.
Right.
Okay, what is the best thing to do? How do I proceed
Hmm.
next?
Hmm.
So these are some of the areas where I feel scenario-based training really works.
Right. So it this is really interesting to know that scenarios are a wonderful way to train learners where we cannot actually take them to the actual situation. For example,
Yeah,
a war scenario, how to use a new arms or
yeah,
ammunitions, maybe. So
right,
that
right.
kind of training can be scenarios actually help also learners to not only critically think, also apply their learning to solve the problem and better decision making, what I feel.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Hmm. So, can you share something on some of the best practices while planning for scenarios?
Right. So the first thing is make sure that your scenarios are meaningful, relevant to the context of the learners, relevant
Hmm.
to their real life,
Hmm.
and make sure that the kind of distractors that you give in your assessments, the decisions that the learner has to take, they
Right.
are very plausible.
Hmm.
Because as with any other assessment, we really don't want no-brainers because the scenarios, by definition, are supposed to make the learner think,
Hmm.
apply their thinking skills.
Correct.
So craft them with some deliberate thought.
Hmm.
And of course, the beauty is that there's always the application aspect because
Right.
the assumption is that the learner is coming with certain knowledge,
Hmm.
a certain understanding of something, and then is now being put into a situation where they call on that
Right.
and then go forward.
Right.
Um, then the other thing is this is more to do with okay, the design part of it.
Hmm.
Especially if you're using branching scenarios, uh, you may be taking the learner down a certain path. You know,
Right.
maybe there are 2, 3 levels of decision making,
Hmm.
but always provide the learner the opportunity to look back to the original decision when they are caught at a complete dead end,
Right.
because otherwise it gets frustrating. So
Yes.
it's not really about testing whether they are doing great or not. It's about helping them figure out and think through the whole process.
Right.
So once you reach a dead end, give them the chance to look back and rethink their choices and make other choices. I
Right.
think this is what we do in real life.
Yes.
So
True.
give that option.
Hmm.
And yeah, as I mentioned, when you're creating branching scenarios, map it out visually outside of your storyboarding
Hmm.
tool so that you
Yes.
have a very clear sense of which path leads where are the
Hmm.
points at which you can loop the learner back to a previous
Yes.
decision,
Hmm.
and have your consequences clearly written out.
Right.
Now, one of the tricky things is when you're trying to explain this to a subject matter expert
Hmm.
and get the input. So I would recommend that when you're dealing with SMEs and you're trying to explain this approach, have a
Hmm.
working demo with you ready where they
Right.
actually see, where you're
Hmm.
going. So
Hmm.
you make this decision, you go down that path, and then you have to give another plausible answer options. So
Hmm.
this is where the SME can clearly see, okay, so this is how it works, and these are the various inputs that
Right.
the ID team needs.
Needs.
And yeah, you could also, set up the inputs, that you want from the SME in an Excel and
Hmm.
use some macro, set up a macro so that it pulls in for each decision they make. The decision is pulled into the next level and then it
Right.
continues from there. So with
Okay.
these small little things, you can really make sure that when you're gathering the content, the
Hmm.
inputs for the scenarios, it becomes smooth sailing.
Right. So,
So
well,
those
that's
are, yeah, some of
ah,
the practices that we followed successfully here at CommLab India.
right. Okay. That's informative, Shalini. And I'm sure these best practices will certainly help our viewers as well. So, thank you, Shalini, for all these practical insights, quick tips and tricks to build scenarios, and the best practices for designing a successful scenario based training program for our learners.
Thank you,
So,
Tanushree, and thank you,
yeah,
dear listeners.
yeah. And hope you all have multiple useful takeaways from today's episode. And we will be back with another interesting episode in the coming week.
Yeah,
Till then, take care and stay tuned.
yeah. I just have one quick announcement that I forgot to make. This is a
Oh,
very
sure.
exciting event. So we have our 3-day community of practice event called LearnFlux,
Right.
where L&D professionals come together and there are exciting sessions with more than 15 global speakers talking about L&D, leadership, AI in L&D,
Yes.
business goals, and a lot of interesting topics. And we also have 3-day workshops on using AI tools. So we have workshops on using ChatGPT, Synthesia, Beyond Go, and Midjourney.
Mm.
And then our sessions also cover things like prompt engineering, gamification, video-based training. So please do join us for this event because there are a lot of wonderful giveaways too. We have templates, and this is also your free templates, and this is also your chance to build your brand as you network with other professionals in the community of practice. And
Right.
it's also for a good cause. With every registration, we sponsor 20 meals to the underprivileged in our community. So I hope to see all of you there and participate and enrich this event with your presence.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay. So that was wonderful. And why wait? So save your spot now and be ready to learn, share, and collaborate with L&D professionals globally. So hope to see you all there. And it was wonderful, Shalini, to have you once again. Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
yeah, and to our viewers, we'll be back soon in the coming week with yet another interesting topic. Until then, take care and stay tuned. Thank you.
Thank you.